Daughter set her coffee spoon face down on the saucer on Christmas Eve morning. Just laid it there, handle pointing toward me, bowl touching the white ceramic. Nobody else at the table noticed. Nobody else was supposed to. That inverted spoon was a signal we had worked out together 11 years ago, when she was 19 and going through something at college she didn't know how to say out loud. It meant, "Dad, something's wrong. I need you, but I can't talk here." I looked at her across the table. She was already laughing at something her boyfriend had just said, leaning into his shoulder, the picture of happy. I picked up my coffee mug and took a slow sip, but some part of me that I thought I'd retired along with my badge had already quietly come back online. My name is Leonard Marsh. I'm 57 years old. I spent 24 years as a licensed fraud examiner and then a senior investigator with the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions. I took early retirement 3 years ago after my wife Helen was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's. She's managing. We're managing. My daughter Audrey is 30. She teaches second grade at an elementary school in Tacoma and has the kind of patience with people that I never quite developed. She called me every Sunday for years. Then, starting around last spring, the calls got quieter, shorter. I figured she was busy. I figured she was happy. She'd told me in October that she was bringing someone home for Christmas. His name was Griffin Sloan. He was 41, originally from Sacramento, and he worked as a regional director for a real estate investment company called Hargrove Equity Partners. They met at a teachers' conference in Portland in February. By August, he was spending most weekends at her apartment in Tacoma. 6 months. That was how long they'd known each other before he was essentially living with her part-time. I told myself people moved faster now. I told myself that wasn't my call to make. He arrived with Audrey on the 23rd, pulling up in a rental car he'd upgraded at the airport because, he said, "Why not? It's Christmas." I watched them from the front porch. He carried both bags without being asked. He had a way of always being slightly ahead of her, opening the door before she reached it, filling her glass before she thought to ask. I noticed it the way I used to notice things without deciding to. An old professional habit, reading the room without registering that I was doing it. When he shook my hand at the door, he held the grip a second longer than necessary and said, "Mr. Marsh, I've been looking forward to this. Audrey talks about you constantly." He said it with a directness that felt practiced but not dishonest. Helen liked him within the first 20 minutes. He asked her about her garden, listened while she answered, and didn't once glance at his phone. That bothered me more than if he had. We had dinner, the three of us, that first night, Helen having gone to bed early. Griffin was easy to talk to in a way that made me want to talk less. He asked detailed questions about my career, said he found financial regulation fascinating, said his own industry could use more oversight, said it with a self-deprecating laugh that made the statement land as humility instead of alarm. He cleared the table without asking. He rinsed his own glass. Lying in bed that night, I told Helen he seemed fine. She said he seemed wonderful. I stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe he is. Christmas Eve morning, Helen's sister arrived at 8 with her husband and their adult son from Bellingham. My brother-in-law, Raymond, came up from Olympia around 10. The house filled in a way it hadn't since before Helen's diagnosis. Voices in the kitchen, the smell of the good candles she saves for company. Griffin was at the stove helping my sister-in-law with the French toast before I'd had my first cup of coffee. He knew Helen took decaf. Audrey had texted him ahead of time. At 9:45, Audrey came to the kitchen to refill her coffee. She reached past me for the carafe, and as she set her spoon down on the saucer to free her hand, she placed it face down. 1 second, then she flipped it over, stirred her coffee normally, and walked back to the dining room. I stood there with the carafe still in my hand. Nobody else saw it. After breakfast, while Raymond and my brother-in-law were watching the game and Griffin was doing the dishes with my sister-in-law, I found Audrey in the hallway outside the linen closet, pretending to look for an extra tablecloth we didn't need. I pulled the door mostly shut behind me. She turned around. The easy smile she'd been wearing all morning was gone. "How long?" I said. She exhaled slowly, the way she used to when she was a teenager and knew a hard conversation was coming. "I'd been trying to figure out how to tell you since October," she said. I leaned against the wall, the same hall where her school pictures used to hang, where she used to stand on her tiptoes to measure herself against the door frame every birthday. "Tell me everything. Start where it started." She sat down on the hall bench and pressed both palms flat on her knees. "He started talking about Hargrove around July," she said, "not in a sales way. More like the way you talk about work when you're comfortable with someone. He'd mention a development project that came in above projections, or a deal that closed well. It felt like sharing, not pitching. He works in real estate, of course he talks about it." I kept my expression still. "When did it shift?" She paused. "August. He sat me down after dinner one night and said he wanted to be upfront with me. He said things were getting serious between us and he didn't want money to be a weird undercurrent. He said Hargrove was opening a new investment round, a private placement, not available to the general public. Only offered to people inside the company and people they had a personal relationship with." She looked at the floor. "He said he wanted me to have access to it, because he loved me and because he believed in building something together." I knew that language. I had read versions of it in case files for 20 years. "What's the entry minimum?" I asked. He said 40,000 to start, but he mentioned some of his clients were going in at 200, 300,000. He said 40 was just the floor. "Has he shown you any paperwork?" "He sent me a private placement memorandum. It looked legitimate. The formatting was correct. It had FINRA registration numbers, a listed registered agent in Delaware. I even searched Hargrove Equity Partners. There's a real website, a LinkedIn company page, photos of properties they've developed in Arizona and Nevada." "Audrey." She looked up. "How much of your savings have you moved?" She was quiet for a moment. "Nothing yet. He said he doesn't want to pressure me. He said the decision has to feel completely right to me." A pause. "But 2 weeks ago he mentioned that this particular round closes January 31st. After that he said it won't reopen for at least 2 years. Artificial urgency. It was like reading from a manual. "Has he mentioned your pension?" I said. She looked at me with something between surprise and relief, the way people look when someone names exactly the thing they've been afraid to name themselves. "How did you know?" "Because your savings account is the conversation opener. A teacher's pension is the target. For someone your age, that's where the real equity lives." I crossed my arms. "Has he mentioned it?" She nodded slowly. "He didn't say pension directly. He asked if I had any assets that weren't actively working for me. He said it in a general way, like a question about financial philosophy. Then he dropped it." "That's called a probe," I said. "He's mapping what you have." She looked down at the floor again. "I've been doing this long enough to know what social engineering looks like from the outside," she said quietly. "I kept telling myself that's not what this was. That I was being cynical because of your job, because of the way I grew up hearing about this stuff." Her voice dropped, and then I realized I might be telling myself that because I didn't want to be right. I went and sat down beside her on the bench. It was barely wide enough for 2 people. "You put the spoon down," I said. I didn't know what else to do. He was right there. "That was the whole point of the signal," I said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I spent the rest of Christmas Eve being the most pleasant version of myself I have been in years. I asked Griffin about the Sacramento Kings. I helped Raymond with the cleanup after dinner. I complimented Griffin on the Brussels sprouts he'd roasted, which were genuinely good. He thanked me with a warmth that felt completely real. He was very, very good. He had the kind of attentiveness that made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. I understood now what that attentiveness was organized around. That night, after Helen was asleep and the house was quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and worked until 2 in the morning. Hargrove Equity Partners had a professional website that had been active for 4 years. It listed a physical address in Scottsdale. It had project photos, a team page with headshots, and a contact form. What it didn't have was a Form D filing with the SEC that matched the investment round Griffin had described to Audrey. Private placements are required to file. A round of the size he'd described would have a paper trail. There was no paper trail. I searched Griffin Sloan in the Washington State Court Records database. Nothing. Oregon. Nothing. I pulled California through the statewide court portal. A civil judgment from 28 in Sacramento County. A woman named Patricia. A name I recognized from somewhere. No, a retired nurse named Helen Farrow had sued Griffin Sloan for breach of contract related to a real estate investment that never materialized. The case had settled. The terms were sealed. She'd gotten something back. Most of it was gone. I wrote down everything. Then I texted a former colleague named Bertrand Osei, who still worked financial fraud at DFI. Need your eyes on something. Not tonight, but soon. He replied at 6:15 in the morning. Call me after 8. I called him at 8:01. Christmas morning I held it together completely. Griffin made his Brussels sprouts again as a side for breakfast, which made Helen laugh, and I laughed too, and meant it less. In the afternoon I took Audrey for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet, most people still inside, the particular stillness of Christmas afternoon. As we walked, I told her everything I'd found. I showed her the screenshots on my phone. I told her about Helen Farrow. I told her about the missing SEC filing. She was quiet for almost a full block. He told me he'd had a bad business falling out with a former client, she said finally. A woman who'd been unhappy with her returns and had tried to claim it was fraud. He said it had been settled and it was painful to talk about. He said he'd learned to be very selective about who he brought investment opportunities to because of it. That's called inoculation, I said. He tells you the story of the accusation before you find the accusation. So when you find it, you're already holding his version in your head. She turned that over in silence. We walked another half block. I thought I loved him, she said. Present tense, but barely. The way you say something when you're actively revising it. I know, I said. What do I do? Carefully, I said, and not by yourself. Bertrand moved quickly once I laid everything out for him on the 27th. He pulled the sealed Sacramento case through interagency channels. Helen Farrow had lost $62,000 to a company called Summit Equity Group, which had listed a Scottsdale address and a professional website and a FINRA registration number that, on closer inspection, belonged to a different, legitimate firm. Different name. Same method. Same city. Same type of target. Bertrand connected with a contact at the SEC's Enforcement Division in Seattle. Within a week they had identified 2 other women in Oregon who had wired money to a Hargrove account in the past 18 months. One of them, a recently divorced high school principal named Connie, had transferred $90,000 before the fund went quiet, and Griffin had explained there were regulatory delays. She'd been waiting for her money for 5 months. She was 63 years old and had been saving that money for 11 years. The name on the receiving account, traced through the wire, came back to a Griffin Tollison. Different last name. Same face. 2 identities confirmed across 2 states. Possibly more. For 3 weeks, Audrey did the hardest thing I've ever watched anyone do. She stayed warm. She stayed present. She didn't pull back suddenly, because a sudden pullback would have triggered him. She asked thoughtful questions about the investment round, as though she was moving closer to yes. She let him believe that January 31st was going to happen, and all the while she documented everything, every text about the fund, Every email, every mention of the deadline, the minimum, the urgency. In the second week of January, Griffin asked if he could come to Tacoma for the weekend. He said he'd been thinking about their future. He said he wanted to walk through the paperwork together, answer any questions she had, make sure she felt fully confident. He brought the private placement memorandum, printed and bound. He brought the wire transfer instructions, printed on Hargrove letterhead. He slid it across her kitchen table. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "Can I ask you something first?" He smiled, "Of course." "I looked up Helen Farrow," she said, "from Sacramento, 2018. The smile didn't disappear. I heard about it from her later, and that was the detail that stayed with me, the same way it had apparently stayed with her. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He held the smile for exactly one beat past natural, and then he tilted his head and said, "I think there might be some confusion." "I don't think so," she said. She put her hand flat on top of the wire transfer sheet. "My father found the SEC filing gap," she said. "He said to tell you he's seen this before." 2 investigators from Bertrand's task force were parked outside. They came in 90 seconds after Audrey sent the text. He didn't run. He stood up from the table and straightened his jacket and looked at Audrey for a long moment with an expression she still hasn't fully decoded. It might have been genuine regret. It might have been the reflex of a man who had spent years performing genuine regret convincingly enough to confuse even himself. "You're smarter than I expected," he said. "My father taught me what to look for," she said. He nodded once, slowly, and then the investigators were inside and the moment was over. The case took 4 months to build fully. The picture was significantly worse than Bertrand had initially estimated. Griffin Tollison had been operating variations of the same scheme for at least 7 years across 5 states. He targeted women between 45 and 70. Most of them recently divorced or widowed, most of them with retirement savings or pension accounts, and a specific kind of hopefulness that he had gotten very good at finding and amplifying. He would spend 4 to 6 months constructing what felt like a real relationship before introducing the investment opportunity. He had an answer for everything. He had a story for every inconsistency. He was genuinely deeply skilled at making people feel found. Most of his victims never reported it. Bertrand told me that's the rule, not the exception. The shame of it, the self-blame, the particular humiliation of having loved someone who was studying you the entire time. Connie, the high school principal, testified at the federal hearing. She got back $40,000 of the 90 through asset recovery. The rest was gone. She testified that the hardest part wasn't the money. She said the hardest part was that he had made her believe she wasn't going to have to spend the rest of her life eating dinner alone. That part has stayed with me. Audrey called me on a Sunday in May, the kind of call that felt like itself again. No careful weight underneath it, no things she wasn't saying. "How are you?" I asked. "Good," she said, and she sounded it. We talked for an hour about nothing important, whether I finally repainted the back hallway, a book she was using in her classroom, a documentary we'd both watched separately and had the same complaints about. Near the end, she said, "Dad, when I put the spoon down, I wasn't even sure you'd remember what it meant." "I remembered," I said. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't say it out loud. He was right there and I didn't know how to start the sentence. "You didn't need to start it," I said. "That was the point." She was quiet for a second. Then, the part I can't explain to people is that it wasn't just what he did. It's that he was good at making me feel specifically chosen. Like out of everyone, he'd looked at my particular life and decided it was worth something. "That's what I keep coming back to." "That's the mechanism," I said. "That feeling of being specifically seen as the product he was selling. It's not a side effect of the relationship, it's the whole engine." "How did you know to come find me so fast?" she asked. "After the spoon. I almost thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was making something out of nothing." You weren't making something out of nothing, I said. You'd carried that signal for 11 years and never used it once. I knew if you used it, you needed to. Another silence, a good one. Hey, Dad. Yeah. I'm coming up for your birthday this year. Just me, I want to come up and do nothing. I told her that was the best glan I'd heard in a while. I told her I'd fix the back hallway before she got there. I've spent 24 years watching people lose things they couldn't get back to other people who were exceptionally good at appearing to be something else. Retirees, teachers, people who were careful with money their whole lives. People who built something over decades and handed it over in a single wire transfer because someone smiled at them the right way and made them feel for the first time in a long time like the future had something worth moving toward. I want to say something clearly because I've wanted to say it every time I sat across from a victim in an interview room and watched them apologize for being deceived. It is not a failure of intelligence. It is not naivety. It is not weakness. The people who run these schemes are often genuinely gifted, not just at lying, but at reading the specific shape of a person's loneliness and filling it with such precision that it feels like recognition. They study you. They learn the version of yourself you most want someone to see. And then they become, for however long it takes, exactly the person who sees it. The warning signs are real. They are learnable. Watch for artificial deadlines, any investment opportunity that will expire if you don't decide now. Watch for opportunities that arrive through personal relationships rather than through normal financial channels. Watch for emotional connection that accelerates unusually fast. Watch for documentation that looks correct but doesn't verify when you check the underlying registrations. Watch for anyone who has an explanation already waiting for every question you raise. And more than any of that, keep the door open with the people who love you, not just cracked open, actually open. Audrey couldn't call me and explain what was happening. He was in the next room. There was no way to start that sentence without him hearing it. But she found a way to tell me anyway, with nothing but a coffee spoon laid face down on a saucer, and 11 years of understanding between us. That's what mattered. Not my 2 decades of experience, not the SEC database or Bertrand's task force or the interagency filing pool. A spoon placed face down on a saucer by a daughter who trusted that her father was paying attention. That's what saved her. I keep coming back to one moment, not the arrest, not the wire transfer documents spread across Audrey's kitchen table. I keep coming back to a coffee spoon laid face down on a saucer on Christmas Eve morning and the fact that my daughter had carried that signal for 11 years and never once used it until she needed to. That's the thing about consequences. They rarely announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, in the choices people make when they think no one is watching, and in the choices they make when they know someone is. Griffin made his for years across 5 states, with careful patience and genuine skill. And the consequence of all of it, all that study, all that manufactured warmth, all that precision, was a man sitting in a federal holding room while the case against him was built file by file. Actions move in one direction, they always have. What I've had to sit with, though, is the question of what actually stopped him, and the honest answer is that it wasn't my experience. It wasn't the SEC database or Bertrand's task force or 24 years of knowing how these schemes work from the inside. Those things were useful, they were necessary, but they were not the reason Audrey came through this without losing anything she couldn't recover. The reason was that she knew the difference between what felt true and what was true. That's harder than it sounds. Griffin was good at his work. He had spent years learning how to make a specific kind of feeling, the feeling of being chosen, of being seen exactly right, and he had delivered it convincingly enough that a 30-year-old woman who was sharp and careful and had grown up in a household where fraud was dinner-table conversation still almost believed him. Almost. She held 2 things at once, the feeling that she loved him and the knowledge that something was wrong. Most people collapse that tension in one direction or the other. She didn't. She sat with the discomfort of not knowing for 6 weeks until she found a way to act on it without tipping him off. That kind of clear-eyed honesty with yourself, the willingness to look at something painful and not look away, that's not a small thing. It saved her. And then she acted, quietly, carefully, over 3 weeks of saying the right things to the wrong person while documenting everything he said. That takes something different from intelligence. It takes the ability to do a hard thing steadily, without the relief of resolution, without knowing for certain how it ends. Audrey has always had that in her. I think I underestimated how much. What I want people to take from this is not just a list of warning signs, though the warning signs are real and they are worth learning. What I want people to take is this: the relationships you build with the people you love, the trust, the private language, the history of showing up. Those aren't separate from your safety, they are your safety. Griffin could manufacture intimacy. What he could not manufacture was 11 years of a father and daughter building something real. He never had a chance against that, even when neither of us knew we were using it. Keep that. Whatever version of the upside-down spoon exists in your life with the people you love, the shorthand, the signal, the understanding that runs under words, keep it. Tend to it. It will matter when you least expect it to, and most need it to.